Hello dear friends, you are on the Ruslan Belov channel and this is the daily summary of combat operations from the Ukrainian front. So friends, the past day was quite eventful in terms of advances. Now we'll discuss everything in detail, but for you to understand how successful the advances were. Over the past day, more than 50 square kilometers came under Russian control, and today we will begin the episode not from the south, as we usually do, but from the northern sectors. But before that, I want to say a few words about Pokrovsk. The fact is that the armed forces of Ukraine were throwing small groups here, right into the center of Pokrovsk, to film videos with the Ukrainian flag and say, "Oh look, we've restored control, we control the center of Pokrovsk here." But what ultimately happened to these AFU fighters you can guess. Spoiler, they will never return from Pokrovsk again. The footage is harsh, so I won't show it here. I uploaded it to the Telegram group, the link to which I'll attach below. Well, now let's move to the advances. And over the past day, imagine, even in Sumy Oblast, which is completely quiet in terms of activity, there was an advance. Moreover, in several areas of Sumy Oblast. Yes, the advances are small. From Alexeyevka, they advanced just over 1 kilometer. Plus from Vorochin, they advanced south also 1 kilometer. And also to Sadki from the west, they advanced 550 meters. The total area of all these sectors where Russian troops advanced is about 3 square kilometers. Well, slightly less than 3. There's 2.7 square kilometers, if we're being precise. And as they say, this is better than 0. Before this, if you remember, everything was completely quiet here with advances, and on the contrary, even the AFU was pressing us. Are there any really global prospects for advances now? No. But such slow creeping offensive will obviously continue. The AFU has run out of steam here and is no longer able to push Russian forces, and now it's the opposite. Russian forces have already begun to advance. And in August, if you remember, Zelensky promised to push Russian troops out of Sumy Oblast, out of all of Sumy Oblast, by mid-October. Well, it's not mid-October anymore, December is around the corner now, and they not only haven't pushed the Russian army out of Sumy Oblast, but have started losing territories in it again. But there are much better prospects on another sector, also in the area of responsibility of the Seva grouping, on the Vochansk direction. There were excellent advances here, please take a look. Advances were on 3 sectors at once. Let's go in order and start with Vochansk. Well, everything is going very well here. Streets such as Svobody Street, Herzen, Zelenaya, Mira, as well as Lomonosov Lane were cleared and taken under full control. Thus, most of the southern half of Vochansk is under Russian control. Or in other words, the Russian army now controls 90% of the city. What remains to be taken here, to bring the figure to 100% control? This part. There are 6 streets and 2 lanes here, but most importantly, this forest here. You take this forest, and well, basically that's it. Vochansk is completely cut off. I'm more than confident that by the end of the year, there's still a whole month ahead, this task will be completed, and consequently, by the end of the year, Vochansk will come under full Russian control. But the Russian army is advancing not only in Vochansk. Thanks to the fact that fighters cleared the southwestern part of the city, they managed to make a dash from there to the urban-type settlement of Vilcha. The advance here was more than 2 kilometers, and they managed to enter the urban-type settlement and take full control of Volchanskaya Street. And I already told you in an episode, if the AFU loses control over Vilcha, then further, look, then we fall into emptiness. Yes, there are strong points here, of course, but there are no settlements. Ukrainian troops are poor at holding positions in the field, as this is more difficult than holding defense inside a city. All defense now for the Ukrainian army is based on settlements. Ukrainian troops are getting worse and worse at holding defense in fields, which means the AFU will have to roll back anyway, and roll back as much as 8 kilometers to the village of Ukrainskoye. Parallel with the start of battles for Vilcha, fighters also managed to enter the village of Liman. This is a village neighboring Sinelnikovo, and as you can see, they managed to both enter the village itself, occupy a number of households, plus occupy part of the adjacent forest to Liman. And the trend here is such that the AFU won't be able to hold back the onslaught for long, which means that in the very near future, Liman will also fall away from them. The total area of advance here on the Vochansk sector is 9.6 square kilometers. That is, almost 10 square kilometers. This is the largest advance on this sector in the last year and a half of combat operations. Actually, they probably only took more here in May 2024, when they were just starting to advance. And, everything indicates that there will be more ahead. There will be even more collapses on the part of the armed forces of Ukraine. Let's move on. There was another sector where the Sever grouping advanced, also in Kharkiv Oblast, in the Vochansk area. Here, fighters continued clearing the pocket between Vochansk and Kamenka. Well, and as you can see, the pocket is almost completely cleared. During the advance, they managed to establish control over the Stanovoy tract. In terms of figures, the advance was 1.5 kilometers. The goal is the same. It's the village of Kolodeznoe. Well, the nearest goal, I mean. The main thing, if fighting continues and there is no peace, is of course Veliki Burluk and connection with the Vochansk sector. Moving on, I have no news for you about Kupiansk. I can only say that there is still no final and full control over the city. At Lyman, the Russian army has a large advance toward the city. The army is gradually approaching the city from the east. Also to the north, Russian troops advance toward the settlement of Kurovy Yar. Here the goal for Russian troops is to advance to Oskol, to lock up the entire Ukrainian army in this pocket on the eastern bank of the Oskol reservoir. By cutting off the southern road, the AFU will have big problems with logistics, as they will have to supply their grouping across the reservoir. From the icons marked on the map, you can see how many strikes are being delivered here against Ukrainian logistics at Lyman. It's also obvious that the Russian army has taken partial control of AFU logistics at Seversk. The AFU grouping on this sector has had most of its supply cut off, and this always means it will start to collapse. Yesterday there were reports that Russian troops are already fighting in the center of Seversk, although fighting is not marked on the map, but soon footage from the city center will arrive, and it will be possible to judge how far Russian fighters have advanced here. Now let's move to the advances in the Pokrovsk area. Well, more precisely, not the city itself, but the western flank. Here, fighters managed to advance 1.5 kilometers north of Kotlino. But what's important here is not even the numbers, but that they managed to take a large AFU strongpoint that was previously preventing the Russian army from moving here. Well, in the end, they managed to break resistance here and take possession of this strongpoint, which means it will be easier to move forward. Also, the Russian army managed to jump into Grishino. This is also a very important advance, as it is through this settlement that Ukrainian troops conduct all counterattacks in Pokrovsk. As for the city itself, there's no news yet. Everything is standard. The AFU is trying to roll onto the northern part. Russian troops are repelling attacks, and parallel to this, the clearing of the city continues. I think you've already seen many videos of how local residents who ultimately didn't leave Pokrovsk, who waited for the Russian army, how they come out and meet Russian army fighters. Also in Mirnograd, the clearing of the city continues. There is an advance of the Russian army at the settlement of Sukhoy Yar. This southern pocket has almost completely come under Russian control, but its clearing will take 1 to 2 weeks. As there are still dozens of Ukrainian army fighters here, their fate is already decided. In the northern part of the settlement, fierce fighting is going on, and as you can see, the Ukrainian army is in no hurry to surrender. Here, fighters of the Nikolaev Airborne Assault Brigade have apparently decided to give their last battle and stay here forever. We're talking about 2,000 soldiers of this elite unit. Zelensky threw them here like Hitler once threw his 6th Army in Stalingrad, without the possibility of exit, so that they would allow him to buy a little time while diplomatic steps from Trump's side are ongoing. Well, the biggest advance over the past day was in Zaparisia Oblast, on the Gulyai-Pole sector. Here, the AFU continues to retreat. Fighters of the Vostok grouping advanced on a wide sector more than 10 kilometers wide. Can you imagine? Moreover, the advance in depth was also serious, from 2 to 5.5 kilometers. The main emphasis is on reaching the villages of Dobropilya and Varvarovka. There's only one forest belt left to Dobropilya, and truth be told, according to data from the guys on the ground, they've already reached it, and not just reached it, but entered the eastern part of Dobropilya. So fighting has already begun here. We're waiting for footage from the guys in the very near future. Varvarovka is still quite far, 4.5 kilometers, but the AFU is retreating, and soon Russian troops will also approach the village. The sector that fighters took control of here is huge. It's 35 square kilometers. On just this one sector, can you imagine? At the same time, every day at Gulyai-Pole, literally every day, FABs arrive. Today another video appeared where FAB after FAB arrives at the city, demolishing AFU positions. Well, that is, now the city is being prepared so that assault groups can then be brought in, so that there won't be really big losses. At the same time, if you see messages from someone, "Oh, battles for Gulyai-Pole have begun," this doesn't correspond to reality. Yes, sabotage reconnaissance groups are causing mischief, but no more. Assault groups haven't been brought in yet, and I think they're waiting for when Russian troops come out to the rear from the north, and then everything will begin. Well, summing up the overall result, over the past day, 51 square kilometers of territory came under Russian control. 51.6 square kilometers to be precise. A very good result. Well, that's all I have for today about the situation at the front. Now let's look at what's happening in the political plane. Presidential aide to Vladimir Putin, Ushakov, commented on his conversations with Witkoff that were leaked to the American press. He believes that the purpose of leaking the conversation is to prevent the establishment of contacts between Russia and the USA. I often talk with Witkoff, but I don't comment on the content. I can talk on the phone with any person, like with Dmitriev. Why is my conversation with Dmitriev of interest? Someone is eavesdropping, someone is leaking, but not us, Ushakov stated. Putin's special representative, Kirill Dmitriev, who also figures in the leaks, told Bloomberg in a comment that the leaked recordings are fake. Russian and Ukrainian special services periodically discuss pressing issues, including prisoner exchanges, Ushakov stated. The new US representative met in the UAE with representatives of Ukraine and unexpectedly with a representative of Russia. The US peace plan for Ukraine was not discussed in the UAE. Russia has not yet discussed the details of the US peace plan with anyone. A number of its points require serious analysis and discussions. Moscow has not yet officially received the US peace plan for Ukraine, but there is an unofficial paper. Russia has unofficially received several versions of the US peace plan, which one can even get confused by, Ushakov emphasized. Europeans are unnecessarily interfering in the peace settlement in Ukraine. Regarding Trump's peace plan, everything is happening exactly as we immediately wrote, reports legitimately. Globalists, Zelensky and the war party in the USA will disrupt it, delay it by any means. There will be no peace this year for sure. The leaked negotiations of Ushakov and Witkoff and Dmitriev, which Bloomberg, globalists, published, are fake and their last hope, who are ready to use their media to achieve their goal. Remember BBC, which faked Trump's speech to try to sink him. Now they apologized, and Trump sued them. Everyone understands that the globalists cannot end the war in Ukraine, and they will resort to any provocations and tricks, up to expanding the war, unfreezing the Transnistrian conflict, when all other Trump cards have been used and don't achieve their goal. So far, Trump has not supported the Swiss plan of Rubio and Ermak, launching at the same time a new round of negotiations bargaining. The next 3 weeks will give us a clear understanding in this case. Brussels is hastily preparing legal justification for using Russian assets. The European Commission has accelerated work on a document that should legalize the use of frozen assets of the Russian Federation to finance Kyiv. The urgency is caused by the fact that a similar proposal appeared in the American peace plan. Washington wanted to direct $100 billion of Russian funds to Ukraine's reconstruction, receiving 50% profit. In Brussels, they fear that the money will pass them by if they don't formalize their own mechanism in time. Ursula von der Leyen has already stated in the European Parliament that European taxpayers will not pay the bills alone. The option being discussed in the EU involves issuing Kyiv a reparation loan of €140 billion against future compensation from Russia. However, the idea has met with resistance from Belgium and Italy. The lion's share of assets is stored in the Brussels depository, Euroclear, and the kingdom fears legal and reputational consequences. After the Geneva negotiations between the USA and Ukraine, The point about frozen Russian assets was removed from the American plan, but it was precisely its appearance that pushed Brussels to accelerated preparation of its own legal mechanisms. Let us remind you, Brussels is again looking for a way to lend money to Ukraine, mix loans, national contributions, and Russian assets. The European Union is discussing new financial creativity to support Kyiv. Now they propose to assemble some kind of combined loan, where they want to take 90 billion euros from the EU budget and collect the rest with contributions from member countries. But even this, of course, is not all. Today, no initiative goes without the desire to use Russian frozen assets. In Brussels, they admit that there is no breakthrough on this issue, and the hope of some diplomats comes down to the fact that Donald Trump will pressure Belgium, which continues to stand firm against legally toxic schemes with assets. Meanwhile, Le Monde reports that the EU is essentially choosing between two equally uncomfortable paths. The first is an expensive but relatively legal joint loan, where countries will have to pay 2 to 3 billion euros annually. The second is a reparation loan that involves using Russian funds but promises legal risks of such magnitude that Brussels lawyers have dug into direct confrontation with the European Union. In practice, the dispute has broken against simple reality. The same Belgium, where assets are placed in Euroclear, warns in plain text, the money is European, and Europeans will also decide their fate. Additional chaos is added by the US peace plan, which in its original version included writing off $100 billion from Russian assets under American management, although then it suddenly shrank to 19 points, and the most toxic ideas went into separate documents. The European Union, one way or another, finds itself between American pressure, Ukrainian expectations, and its own fear of climbing into a legally dead zone. Against this background, Moscow's position remains unchanged. Any actions with Russian assets are theft, and the consequences will be appropriate.